My name is Mohammed Amin, and I'm the chairman of the Conservative Muslim Forum, and I'm going to be your master of ceremonies for tonight. All Conservative Muslim Forum events start with a Quran reading. So I've asked Sheikh Salah Al-Ansari, the Imam here, to do a Quran reading in Arabic, after which I will supply the English translation.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم فما أوتيتم من شيء فمتاع الحياة الدنيا وما عند الله خير وأبقى للذين آمنوا وعلى ربهم يتوكلون والذين يجتنبون كبائر الإثم والفواحش وإذا ما غضبوا هم يغفرون والذين استجابوا لربهم وأقاموا الصلاة وأمرهم شورى بينهم ومما رزقناهم ينفقون.
I'll give you the translation first, and then I'll explain why we chose this particular section of the Quran. So whatever thing you are given, that is only a provision of this world's life, and what is with Allah is better and more lasting for those who believe and rely on their Lord. And those who shun the great sins and indecencies, and whenever they are angry, they forgive. And those who respond to their Lord and keep up prayer, and their rule is to take counsel among themselves, and who spend out of what we have given them. And these three verses are from the 46th surah of the Quran, verses 36 to 38. And I picked them because of that concept of taking counsel among themselves, which in Arabic is called shura. And I see that personally as a precursor to the concept of democracy, because in this country we have 60 million people. We can't all get together in one room and take counsel together, but through our democratic processes, we can achieve the same thing. Now, I'd like to call upon Shabir Alim, who is a trustee of the mosque, to formally welcome us.
أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. I mean, on behalf of the trustees, I'm not going to speak too long. On behalf of the trustees, first I'd like to welcome you all and the Conservative Muslim Forum for organising this as well. Sister Shaheen as well for, I mean, logistically this is a big one to do. I've been instructed firstly to talk about fire exits and toilets. Not most, yes, exactly. So toilets, if anyone is in the right down the end of the hall there, and fire exits, they're pretty clearly signed out that way, and the muster point is right down to the front. So if you work your way around to the front of the building, patch of grass right up the end. Also, we have Isha prayers at about 7:30, so we'll be taking a break for them. For those who want to observe the prayers, you're more than welcome to in either the halls, the men's downstairs, the sisters, ladies upstairs. And obviously, there's tea and refreshments still available outside. A few things I should mention from my own perspective, from a personal point of view about politics and so on. I've never been involved in politics. But thinking about this, and I was talking to some of the brothers earlier this afternoon about how my dad came here in 1961 as a student of law and the British Constitution, which I didn't even know was a subject back then. And I was just thinking that if the generations before us had got engaged politically as we want to get engaged politically, If they've done the same thing, I think a lot of the situations that Muslims nowadays talk about, with regards to the establishment and so on and so forth, we would not be finding ourselves in that situation. So the message from me, at least, is really we do need to be engaged, right? However that is. Now, to just finish off, what I should do is actually take a quick quote from our brother Malcolm X when he was speaking in Detroit in 1964. And he said, "We must understand the politics of our community, and we must know what politics is supposed to produce. We must know what part politics plays in our lives, and until we become politically mature, we will always be misled, led astray, or deceived or maneuvered into supporting someone politically who doesn't have the good of our community at heart." I think with that thought, I should hand over back to Mohammed.
Let me say a few more words about the event. I'm a Conservative. All of the speakers are members of the Conservative Party, but this event is being hosted by this mosque. And mosques are charities, and by law they are required to be politically neutral. And the mosque is doing nothing more for us than it would not be willing to do for the Labour Party or the Liberal Democrat Party, because they are politically neutral. And our purpose today is not to recruit you into the Conservative Party, or if anybody wants to join, please have a word with me, but rather to encourage you to get involved in the political system, regardless of which party you support, because Muslims, in my view, have rights and responsibilities. They have the right to be heard, but they have the responsibility to help support our country. That includes supporting our country by making sure that local councils run effectively. And one key step in that is to be a councillor. So now I'm going to introduce Saeed Kamal, who's a member of the European Parliament. He has previously been the leader of the Conservative group in the European Parliament, but he's moved on to bigger and better things, because he now leads the entire umbrella grouping in the European Parliament that the Conservative Party belongs to, which, from memory, is the European Council of Conservatives and Reformists.
I'll say it.
Yeah, you can say it for me. Saeed Kamal.
I've got to check how long have I got, just so I don't go over.
You've got about 15 minutes.
Okay, about 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much for inviting me to be with you this evening. I am the leader of the European Conservatives and Reformists group, which is the third largest group in the European Parliament. And one of the nice things about being an MEP is actually the anonymity back in this country, because many people don't actually know much about Europe. But it's also one of the sad things, because let me very quickly explain how laws are made in the EU. There are three main institutions that you should be aware of. One is something called the European Commission. It's a civil service, effectively, but it's very different to our civil service. What it does, it proposes legislation. So legislation starts at the European Commission. Sometimes they thought it up. Other times, to be fair, the 28 governments can't agree on a set of laws, and they ask. So it might be something like food labelling. Should we have traffic lights, or should we have GDAs, for example? So they start there, and they say, well, tell you what, we want a European-wide system because companies in Britain want to sell throughout Europe, and rather than have 28 different standards, maybe this is one area that we can agree on a standard. So the Commission will come up with a proposal. That piece of paper then goes to two other bodies. The first one is called the European Council. And the European Council is effectively the 28 governments of the European Union. So our governments will negotiate, and they will amend that piece of law. At the same time, and especially since the Lisbon Treaty that came to force a few years ago, that piece of paper, or that document, also goes to the European Parliament. And the European Parliament also amends that piece of paper, or that legislation. You then have three versions of that document. The European Commission proposal, the European Council version, and the European Parliament version. And then we get in a room, and we have what I would call a bum fight, but in the technical terms we call it a trialogue. There are three parties that come to a compromise, and that becomes EU law. That EU law that is then passed to the 28 member states to become national law. So a lot of our laws on financial services, on environment, some of not health but public health issues, some of our food laws start off in the European Union. Now what does that mean? That means that the European Parliament actually has equal power with the 28 governments of the EU. And it's one of the things that's little noticed here, And not many people realise that. In the Parliament, you have to sit in political groups, and I'm fortunate enough to now be the leader of the third largest group in the European Parliament. Now, how did I start? Well, it's interesting, you said your father came to this country in 61, was it? My father came to this country in 1952 from Guyana. And he, when he came to this country, he worked on the railways, the steam trains, the old North East Railway line, London North East Railway line. And then he became a bus driver. And we grew up in, first of all, near Turnpike Lane. And then we moved later on to Edmonton. I grew up and went to school in Edmonton. But my father and my mother always told me that there is no limit to what you can achieve if you believe in yourself, believe in Allah, and work hard. And he said, don't let people tell you that you can't do something. And I think sometimes in our own communities, one of the biggest barriers to progress is not what other people do, but we make our own barriers. I remember growing up, and kids very similar to me would say, we can't achieve anything in society, we're not part of this society. They would say it's because of our colour, because we're working class kids, and more recently because it's because of our faith. And why are we seeing our colour, our background, or even our faith as a barrier? It should not be a barrier, but we make it a barrier. And my parents also used to tell me, if someone says to you, something can't be done, they are showing their own weaknesses, not yours. So my message, now that I'm here, is that I go to schools, youth clubs, and lots of community projects, and I'll say the very same message. You may not want to be this boring guy in a blue suit or a grey suit, but you can all be. You can be, your children can be, and I think that's a message that we ought to show, that we are very much a part of this society. And the faith, where does it come? We all have different views on our faith, and how much we should share it, and how much we should show it. And we shouldn't disagree on that, we should respect it. Because actually, the ultimate judgment is at the end of our life, if our scales are heavier with the good deeds than our bad deeds, then hopefully we will go to paradise. If our bad deeds are heavier than our good deeds, then we'll be done, as it's saying in the Quran, to the hellfire. But that is for each of us to decide how we want to interact with that. Our faith is important. For me, I don't wave a flag about my faith, but it's a personal thing. It's important to me that I go to Jummah Salat, I pray my prayers, I fast during the month of Ramadan, but we all have our own. We shouldn't judge each other on that. But nor should we let it be seen to be any sort of barrier to getting involved. And so how do you get involved? Well, it's very simple. The first thing you ought to think about is which political party is closest to your own views. And there'll be a whole range of reasons why you come to that conclusion. It may have been your experience with one particular political party at a time. It may be someone from a political party has helped you. You may look at the TV and say, actually, I agree with that guy more than I agree with that guy. That's the first stage of the political process. Which party is closest to your own view? The second stage is actually relatively simple. Actually, you just apply to join your local party, whichever political party you prefer. Phone up the local office or the local organisation and ask to join. And then you just start, when you get to know more about those politics, so you'll be a volunteer, you might be asked to stuff envelopes, you might be asked to organise events, you might be asked to go knock on doors and campaign. And then actually, if you want to stand, you should ask, or you will be asked. I was very fortunate, I was asked. Sometimes people say, don't worry, stand in a seat for experience, you'll be what they call a paper candidate. You have no chance of winning, and don't worry, it won't disrupt your life. And you may do that, and you may end up getting elected. So just be very careful when someone says it will be a paper candidate. I know many people who said, oh, I'm only put my name on paper and they end up getting elected. And the thing about politics is you just have to keep going. You just have to, if you're knocked down, you get yourself up again. My parents used to say to me, the sign of a good man or woman is the person who gets up one more time than they're knocked down. I joined the Conservative Party in 1987 as a student, because I felt it was closest to my own personal views. I believe it's a party that tied in with what my parents used to say. There's no limit to what you can achieve. I looked at my local MP at the time, Ian Twin. He was the son of a bricklayer. I looked at the party chairman, Cecil Parkinson, was the son of a railwayman. Norman Tebbit was also an Edmonton boy who grew up there. Margaret Thatcher was the daughter of a grocer. That, to me, and now this is why it's a personal thing, that to me told me that that party was in tune, the Conservative Party was in tune with what my parents were telling me. Now someone else completely different might have said, well, actually, I'm more in tune with another party. Think about someone like David Langley, who's from the Labour Party, who grew up in Tottenham. I grew up in Edmonton. But he decided that the Labour Party was closest to his own personal view. It's a personal thing. I can't tell you that you are definitely this party or that party. Only you know. But what I would say is get involved, and you never know where you find yourself. I joined the party in 87. In 94, I was asked to stand as a council candidate in Lambeth, where I was living. I lost. In 95, I moved to Bath. I finished my PhD and I was lecturing at the Bath University, and I was asked to stand in a local council. I lost. In 2000, I moved back to London, and I was asked to stand for the London Assembly. I lost. I promise this is going somewhere. In 2001, I was selected to stand for that well-known Conservative stronghold of West Ham, and I thought I would defy history and become the first Conservative elected there. And I came close. I lost by about 15,000 votes, but you know, I lost. And then in 2004, I stood in the European Parliament elections, and I lost. And a year later, because of the list system, a colleague of mine became an MP, and I moved up the system and became an MEP. So over 18 years, since joining the party 87, I stood 5 times, lost 5 times, and became an MEP, and then I won my elections in 2009 and 2014. And yet, I was only 38 when I got elected. So, but that's not a typical route. Some people I know, I have friends, my friend, the MP for Wickham, Steve Baker, he joined the party. 2 years after he joined the party, he was selected to be the parliamentary candidate for Wickham, and then he became an MP. We all have different routes, we all have different ways, but actually, I think it is a rewarding way to help, if you like, share your good fortune with others. And then what do you do once you're elected? Well, there is the official job that I do as the leader of the third largest group in the European Parliament. Probably the most, I don't wave a flag around this, but I'm probably the most senior elected politician in Europe, the British politician in Europe. The other thing is you use it as a platform for those things that are really important to you. And the 2 things that are personally very important to me, one is social mobility. So I now want to go to talk to the children that are just like I was, 40 odd years ago, and say to those children, give them the confidence to say, if I can do it, so can they. I turn down all the private schools and the best schools. I go back to my old school occasionally, but I turn down all the private schools. And I go to the schools where, teachers tell me they want to motivate the children. Children come from the easiest of backgrounds. I go to a lot of youth clubs, and I try and give them the message that if I could do it, a boy whose father came to Britain in the 50s, so can they. The second thing I believe very strongly about is community-led solutions to tackling poverty and deprivation. In some ways, when I look at the political system, I think both the left and the right fail the poor. When I look at the left, I think they believe that they can pass a law in Brussels, Westminster, maybe in a local council, in town hall, and they think that solves the problem of poverty, or throw more money at the problem. But I know, when I've been to areas where there have been councils who believe this sort of thing, you still go to some of the social housing and you see deprivation and problems. On the other hand, I think people on the right, on my side of the political spectrum, are just as bad sometimes. We say, let's cut taxes, let's roll back the state and people will help themselves. But we forget that people are not those rational economic individuals that you read about in textbooks. People sometimes don't know how to help themselves or motivate. And one of the things I'm hugely proud of in London is the thousands of projects in London, community organisations that help solve the problems. Sometimes actually they're faith-based. Sometimes they come out of churches, synagogues, mosques, temples, gurdwaras. Sometimes they're based on an estate. If I think of 2 or 3 projects that I help and then I'll stop. One is a fantastic project in Northampton that helps drug dealers or ex-drug dealers. And they said, look, you know what, something about you? You've actually got entrepreneurial skills. But actually it's illegal. So what they do, they convert those guys into sandwich dealers. They started a sandwich business. And they've got a fantastic t-shirt from dope dealer to hope dealer. Now what can I do? I don't know what's in a sandwiches, by the way. But what I can do, what can I do? I can give those guys a platform and I can help them, put them in touch with funders so they can grow. I can find them customers. So one of the things that I've been writing to is big organisations in London, in the city, asking would they consider buying sandwiches from this company. None of the involvement of the politicians or the state. The only thing I can do is introduce them. I work with a prisoner rehabilitation project because we forget. People go to prison, sometimes through no fault of their own, sometimes they fall into bad company, but the offending rate is very high. It's how do we break people out of that circle, that vicious circle of re-offending? They come out, they have no money, no one will help them. What do? They turn back to crime. So how do we help them? And my job gives me a platform to introduce these charities to funders, to others, so we can try and solve some of those problems. So it's not only about getting elected, it's what you do when you get elected. There's no point just going to politics just to get the title, the councillor before your name, the MEP or MP after your name. Think about what it is you're in for. And I think one way we should look at this, especially those of us faith, one day we will pass on from this world. Think about when we are lying in our last hours, looking back at this world. What do we want to say that we have left behind? Do we want to say that we made a difference and we inspired others to make a difference? Hopefully we can do that. And I would urge you, whatever your views, to think about getting involved in the political system of this country. Thank you very much.
I'd like to thank Saeed for that very inspiring speech. What really struck me was that point about there's no limit to what you can achieve. My parents were illiterate. My dad was a manual worker. I went to Cambridge University and became a partner in Price Waterhouse. Our next speaker is David Burrows, who is the MP for this area. And that means that he is the MP for every single person who lives in this constituency, regardless of whether they are Conservative, Labour, Liberal Democrat, BNP, doesn't matter. He represents everybody, and that's the way that MPs work. He's also the chairman of the Conservative Christian Fellowship. And you don't have to be a Christian to join the Conservative Christian Fellowship. In fact, I'm a member of the Conservative Christian Fellowship, in the same way that you don't have to be a Muslim to join the Conservative Muslim Forum. And one of our organisers who's on the executive, who's here tonight, Jean-Marie Douglas, she is not a Muslim, but she's on our executive. So, David Burrows.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be with you today. It's really good to talk to one who's a good friend, and to very much endorse pretty much everything he says, and to really welcome the opportunity to talk to you firstly about why I got involved. And I don't think I'd necessarily have expected to be Member of Parliament many years ago. Sort of, if I was thinking, 20 years ago, let's say 25 years ago. I think I was supposed to be in politics now 20 or so years, but let's go 30 years ago. My interests were far away from politics, but I've ended up here. Now, the reason I say that is because it may not be something which you'll expect to be involved in. You may not think you know everything about politics, and it's something that you shouldn't just be scared off by that. You should see that it's something for everyone. Everyone has a role to play, a responsibility to play, to be involved in politics, whether it's the very least in voting, or whether it's, as we're talking about now, getting more engaged, whether it's in a political party, indeed becoming a local councillor, becoming elected representative. I'm with friends on here, and there's particular friends who've been on that campaign trail, on the political trail with me. There's Murat Seven, who stood for council in Southgate Green, and there's Councillor Tahira at the back. And they will vouch for me that as you go about, and we'll be going about in the 12 weeks to go before the election day, what most concerns us and is most dispiriting is not the person actually who votes for another political party and with conviction. It's actually the group who just don't care, or who are disinterested or distrustful, and are just or ignorant of what we will stand for. And that's what's of real concern. We must be standing up for positive engagement, and that's why it's so good and important, this event. Now, I started my political journey back at school, and the thing that inspired me to get involved was leaders, was people of character, people of conviction, of substance, who were willing to stand up for what they believed in. And whatever one's views of these two particular leaders, there are certainly people you couldn't accuse not of standing up for what they believed in. They were indeed Margaret Thatcher, who's been mentioned, and Ronald Reagan, two people at that time who really just stood up and be counted. And that's something, without going into detail actually about their policies, it's something that really inspired me about people who are willing to stand up and be counted. And essentially that's what we're all about. We're about wanting to stand up and be counted. because those two things matter. To stand up and voice your opinion, to be there in the public square. And that public square can be in that square of Westminster, it can be in Brussels, in Strasbourg, it can be in Palmer's Green, indeed in the triangle of Palmer's Green or the square, or whatever you want to talk about it. It matters to be standing up, because if you're not standing up, then who are you ceding that place for? Who's then going to be taking that place for you? And it matters to be counted, because politics is about numbers. It really is about numbers. It matters every day in Parliament when we have votes. There's numbers that decide whether laws are passed. It matters in terms of the votes when people stand up for election. It matters, and it's important that if you see that, then others will take that place. Now, my journey, as I started at school, just being inspired by those who really had the character to stand up for their convictions. And that's what really, I think that's increasingly the case. Those people I spoke about who have some disinterest with and distrust of politicians, some of it is you can understand. Some politicians have certainly let not only the public down, but other politicians down as well. But it's people of character, people want to have politicians who they can believe in, who are going to stand up and be counted, and then when they make promises, they fulfil those. And that really matters, and we want that character. And it's indeed people of faith, or values, that can have that character, that have those values that underpin those principles, that give them that strength. And it's important to have people of faith involved in the public square, and to ensure that they're there, willing to really stand up and be counted. Now, I went off to university in Exeter, and the ideas of politics were there, but would I become an activist in some way? Would I get involved? And rather than just talk about it and chat about it with friends, would I actually go that extra step and stand up and be counted? Well, I was there at university with two friends. One of those is Sajid Javid, who you should know, who's now Cabinet Minister, Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport. And the other was, is Robert Halfon, Member of Parliament for Harlow. And interestingly, there's myself, and you mentioned as a Christian, there's Saeed, a Muslim, and there's Sajid, a Muslim, and there's Robert Halfon, who's Jewish. And the three of us came together with different religious backgrounds, who were both united in a concern to stand up together, indeed as conservatives. But particularly, what we were standing up against is that we're standing up for things, but you're also standing against other areas and things you don't agree with. Now, you will be able to tell me about lots of things you disagree with. There may well be things you disagree with me as well. And the way to deal with that, and one very real way to do that, is not just to talk amongst ourselves, but to be willing to go there and stand up and against things as well. And when we were in university, there was these students that were occupying the Vice-Chancellor's office and were saying things that we just didn't agree with. And we looked around and looked, is someone going to stand up? And it ended up, there was just a few of us. And there were myself and Sajid and Robert Halfon, another person, Tim Montgomery, who if you read the Times, you'll see him. If you watch the news as well, you'll see and hear him as well. That we wanted to say what we thought was right and in interest to those around us. And we then got involved politically. In some ways, surprisingly, I didn't feel myself particularly experienced in it, but just to react to what we thought was unfair. And if you've got that spirit, that view that you think things are unfair in life, either for yourselves or particularly around you, for your family or in your community, if you feel that sense of injustice, the one real way to show that is to get involved politically. Now, I then thought, I was a student, came back as a lawyer and as an advocate, and I wanted to speak up was part of what I did, and profession I did, and I'm a criminal defence solicitor, dealing with issues of injustice and standing up in the local courts in Enfield and Haringey and going to the local prisons and others, which we heard something of that from Saeed as well. And that's what I did, and I wanted to speak up for people. It was only though when someone said, well, why don't you just get involved as a local councillor, that I started to think, well, hang on, and I'm really concerned about my area. I've grown up in Fosters. There's things very local that I don't think were right and needed someone to speak up about. There was a local planning issue. The local Esso garage, they wanted to make into a 24-hour service station. Now, a very local issue, but politics in many ways is very local. We have these big issues and big concerns, but a lot of people are quite rightly concerned about the very local issues going on around. You'll be as concerned about the parking around here and what's going on in terms of the fact the lack of being able to find a parking space and issues like that. You may be concerned about the cycle lane that's being planned to go up through green lanes, or the issues about libraries, or the fact that bin collections could well become fortnightly rather than weekly. These things, these things really get to us all and worry us, and we want people to speak up about that. And there was this issue about this local garage that was going to be become 24-hour that I was concerned about, and my neighbours were concerned about, and they said, look, we want someone to speak up about it. Can you, David? And I thought, well, yeah, I can. And I ended up getting engaged with the council on that issue, and then I was encouraged to stand for council. Not knowing too much about it, but I did, and I just got selected and became the local councillor for Fosters, and was that councillor then, and then in Winchmore Hill with Councillor Erton Hero about there. And we stood together and fought a very marginal ward there, and continued that sort of political journey together. It led to me going to Edmonton, to Edmonton and coming second in 2001, and trying to retain it after the great work of Ian Twin, and then had the opportunity to stand for Parliament in my seat here in Enfield Southgate, where I've lived all my life, and the great privilege and opportunity to be able to do that. Now, all that happened through the encouragement of others, and it's so important to have these networks as well, because I myself, wasn't totally clued up on all of this, but it needed others to encourage you. Don't feel that you've got to have everything sorted. Don't think that you have to know everything about every political party and everything they believe in. You won't agree with everything. I mean, none of us, we don't agree with everything. Ert and I, and we don't agree on every part of policies. There's different political parties, not least the Conservative Party, is a board. It's a board church or a board mosque, whichever we want to call it. But it's very much got lots of breadth of issues, whether it's on foreign policy issues or domestic issues. But what we all are united about is a concern to serve. And that's what we care about, a concern to serve others and stand up for issues and values that matter. Now, we've heard of really, from Sir Kamal, we've heard some really important principles, which I very much share with him. And it's broadly around the issue of service for others, because that's what we're about, aren't we? And people of faith are there to concern for others. Now, I know that the community and education centres are all about that. It's all about trying to empower the community to serve the community and others. And that's what it is about politics. We are the same extension. We're not just sort of out there on the side. We're also all about the issue of service. And we need people that aren't there just there for themselves. You may think of politicians who are just there, going to go their own way, going to get their career, going to pursue power, but they're there to serve others. And that's what we're about as politicians, and that's what we want to encourage people to get involved about. So please consider that. It matters. It matters for others. And I'm just going to tell you one story about one person that it matters for, just to give you an example of what we can do, whether it's as councillors or as members of Parliament. We can stand up there for those who don't have that voice. Now, one of those people just down the road there was Gary McKinnon. You may have heard of the story of Gary McKinnon. He was in his flat. He had Asperger's syndrome, which particularly made him hone in on computers. And he was there tapping into his computer. Had great ability in computers. He was hacking. He did wrong, and he needed to be dealt with for doing that wrong. But he hacked into the computer systems of America, systems of NASA. He got through there. He got there through tapping in passwords. Now, he did that by tapping in the word password, P-A-S-S-W-O-R-D. That was the password, and he got through. And then he thought, okay, that's not doing well here. And he said a few things about George Bush along the way, which wasn't necessarily that clever, but he did. And he said what he thought of him. And then he moved on to the next system, and he got through, to cut a long story short, because I haven't got much time, he eventually got through to the US Naval Fleet system. And he thought, I'll tap in the password. He tried password, it didn't work. So he thought, okay, I'm going to tap in another one. And he tapped in A-D-M-I-N-I-S-T-R-A-T-O-R, administrator. And he got through. He got through. Now, thankfully he wasn't a bad guy, and he got through, and he wasn't going to do anything serious apart from post another few things about what he thought of George Bush. But by this time, he also managed to disable the US Naval Fleet for a day. Not the most sensible thing to do, but nevertheless he did it. And he did it, and anyway, that's what happened. And then, not long after, in his Palmer's Green flat, he got a knock on the door from some US agents wanting to take him over to America and to charge him with serious crimes and to lock him up for 60 years, seriously so, in a US jail. Now, Gary McKinnon needs to be dealt with in this country for obviously misusing computers, but the issue was to whether he could be extradited to America. And then this went on for 10 years of battle. His mother fought, he fought, and I fought on his behalf. They needed a voice in Parliament to fight these unfair extradition laws which would just whip a UK citizen from a flat in Palmer's Green and without considering any evidence in this country off to a US jail. And that was going to happen. It was going to happen, thankfully. The Prime Minister said we promised to not do that. But nevertheless, there's one thing to promise it, it's another thing to do it. And we went to the 11th hour, campaigning, we're speaking up in Parliament about it. This was one of the most vulnerable man. He, by this time, had become mentally ill, was going to commit suicide and kill himself if he was extradited. His life was literally on the line, a citizen in Palmer's Green, because of this extradition issue. And I had to speak up for him. And eventually, just the very 11th hour, the Home Secretary Theresa May decided, yes, in the interest of compassion and fairness, and the fact that we'd promised to this constituent that we weren't going to extradite him, we weren't, and we stopped it. And that's just a very clear example of a local issue, but a local person having a very national significance, and we now, from then we reformed extradition. But this very vulnerable individual needed a voice. And it can happen in that national, high-profile way, or in other less ways. And I know there's Councillor and others who, and so I can talk about lots of individuals on a very much a private level where we're having that voice. And we need to be there to stand up and be counted. And so that's why it's so important for us to do that. Because if you don't do that, who is going to take your place?
Thank you, David. We will now have a break for Isha prayers and resume at 7:40 as soon as the prayer is over. Our next speaker is Peter Fleming, who is from the Local Government Association. And he's going to talk about the role of a councillor in more detail, as well as the role of a council leader. So over to Peter.
Thank you, and thank you so much for inviting me this evening. I'm going to sort of cover quite a bit of ground that's already been covered, but I thought I'd start, as the other two very eminent speakers have, with a little bit of my story, which is slightly different, again, to the stories that you've heard before. So, as was said, my name's Peter Fleming. I'm a councillor in Sevenoaks, which is a district in Kent, and I'm also leader of that council. But I also chair a national board for the Local Government Association, which is a cross-party organisation that represents all councils in England and Wales. We leave the Scottish to do their own thing. So a little bit about my journey. I never thought I would be a politician, and I guess I don't actually see myself still as a politician, even though I've been a councillor for 16 years. And many of you will be thinking, how can that be so? He looks too young to have been a councillor for 16 years. But it is the lighting in here that is helping me this evening. So I don't consider myself a politician, and normally when it's my turn to come on, the MPs and the MEPs have gone. And so that allows me then to be a little bit rude about them. Now they're staying, unfortunately. But I really believe that all politics is local. You know, anybody here been to a restaurant recently? No? Okay. So, did you get ill? No? Why didn't you get ill? Because the council goes and checks it. How many of you have driven over a pothole recently? Yep. That's down to your council. How many people have walked past some litter and thought, who's going to do something about that? Again, it's the council. So everything that affects our everyday lives is politics. It's not something done in Westminster. It's not something done, with respect, in Brussels. It's what happens in your street. It's what's happening outside your front door. That is politics, and we need to change our mentality that the people that you see on telly in suits and ties are the only people that do politics. We all do politics. We all moan to our friends and family about things locally. That's politics, right? And when we change our mindset and believe that everything that affects our daily lives is politics, how the council spends the money that they take off us in council tax, that's politics. You know, so That's the mentality. And once you understand that everything that affects you when you leave your house is politics, then suddenly that spark is often ignited inside you to say, actually, I think I could do a better job. I think I could represent people like me better. Or those politicians don't look like me. They don't act like me, and they don't believe in the things that I believe in. And again, I go back to the two eminent speakers before who said, actually, although tonight is about the Conservative Muslim Forum, you know, this could be the Labour Muslim Forum, this could be the Lib Dem Muslim Forum. It's unlikely to be the UKIP Muslim Forum for obvious reasons. But the reality is, you know, I have friends in all the parties, you know, and my job tonight is to say, you know, stand for what you believe in. You know, if you feel passionately about the place that you live, become a local councillor. Make that first step. Put yourself out there. A lot of people get really scared. This is a great booklet. Although it's got Conservative Party on it, actually inside it sets out the things that we are looking for, or communities look for in councillors, and that's about a genuine interest in your community, and that would go for a Labour councillor or a Lib Dem councillor or a Conservative councillor. It's about, you know, an interest in people. It's no good if you don't really like people. I would suggest that don't become a councillor, because when they stop you in the street or phone you up, people would like to unload some of their issues on you. I look after a town centre ward, which is part of the district that I live in, and I live in the middle of that. And I can't. My high street isn't very long. It probably would take a normal person about 5 minutes to walk from one end to the other. I never shop on a Saturday morning. It takes half an hour, 45 minutes, because recognisable. It's the ginger hair. It's a blessing and a curse. But people recognise me and will cross the road, often dodging cars, to tell me about their problem. And I like to hear that. I mean, it's a slightly weird part of me, but I like to hear people's issues, hear people's problems, and try and do something about it. So, you know, if there's really one message from tonight, it's about standing for what you believe in. So how did I get here? I got here by not the normal route. I left school when I was 16, and I left. I like to say I left with 9 GCSEs, but apparently you're only allowed to count the ones that are grade A to C. So I left with 1 GCSE, and I left school and I went straight to work. And I went to work in a local theatre as a lighting technician. I did the lights in the local theatre. And I had quite a successful career, and I went and worked in the West End, in London and other parts. And then from my school days, somebody remembered that I'd been involved in voluntary service. I'd worked in an after-school club for children, and I'd worked on a project with mentally and physically handicapped adults. And they said, you know, Peter, you'd be just the person to be a counsellor. I had no clue what a counsellor was. And they said those immortal words, don't worry, you won't get elected. Yeah, some mistake. Anyway, so I went to a selection meeting. There were 4 people being selected for 3 seats. I came 4th, which is not good. But between that point and the election, one person fell out, and they asked me whether I would stand. They actually invited me back for a second interview, and I said, well, look, if I didn't make an impression on you at the first interview, then frankly, you know, there's no point in me having a second one. So within 6 years, I was leader of the council. I've got my 1 GCSE. I run a council, 450 staff. It's £30 million a year we spend on services that directly affect the 114,000 people who live in my district. So, you know, this is for everyone. This isn't for an elite who go to university or to certain universities. This isn't, you know, for people who are just one type of person and went to the right schools. This is for everyone. And local politics, more than anything, is for everyone in this room. If you look in the mirror and see, you know, people like you in your community, then you are the right person to represent them. So, you know, I hope listening to these two fine speakers this evening and me rabbiting on a little bit, you feel empowered to go out. Again, it doesn't matter which party. We'd like it to be Conservative, but you can be whichever party you want. Find the party that speaks to you and go and speak up for your community. Thank you so much for coming this evening.
Thank you, Peter. Apologies for not introducing you as Councillor Peter Fleming. It was left off my written agenda.
That's okay. The titles are not important. You can call me Peter.
Our next speaker is Councillor Halima Khalid. I first met Halima probably about 18 months ago when we set up the Conservative Muslim Forum East Midlands branch, which she also chairs, and she is a councillor from the East Midlands. I was absolutely astonished when she told me today, earlier on, that she was in hospital today for an emergency, and despite that she is still here down in London to speak to us, so I'm incredibly grateful and, as I said, quite amazed. So, Councillor Halima. Sit down, it might be easier.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah. The microphone will be fine.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamu alaikum. As Brother Amin said, my name is Halima Khalid, and I'm currently a councillor for the ward of Chilwell and Total in Nottingham. I was elected in 2012, so this is my third year, and I just want to share with you a little about my journey as becoming a councillor. Prior to becoming a councillor, I was already heavily involved with local community work. As the founder of the Nottingham branch of National Charity Wellbeing of Women, I had already been hosting charity events for the last 10 years, and still do to this day. It was my charity work that brought to the attention of Anna Soubry, our wonderful MP in Nottingham, who suggested that I run for council. I would never have thought that I would have become a councillor. But she encouraged me to become. And when I went home and told my husband that Anna had said that I should be councillor, he said, because I want to sound politically right, but I live in an all-white area, and there's only 2-3 Asian families, and my husband said to him, you'll only get 5 votes, which is just my family, my 3 sons and myself. So it wasn't very, he says, don't waste your time, you know, just carry on what you do. I'm a biochemist by profession, and I was employed at the time. And I have 3 wonderful sons. One is doing a PhD at Cambridge, and one's a medical student, and one son works for McKinsey, who are my strength. And said, when I told them, they said, Mum, don't listen to Dad, go for it. You'll make a fantastic councillor. And that gave me the encouragement that I should go for it. And I won with over 50% majority. It was a landslide. And I am the only Muslim councillor in Broxton Council. And we have 44 councillors, but I'm the only Muslim. And I don't think there's ever been a Muslim councillor in Broxton. But I don't feel any different. I have a voice, and I find it very privileging and rewarding to the things that I do. Little things in life, like an old man came to me and he had terminal cancer in his 80s, and he said that they'd rejected his disabled badge. I said, how could they reject it? You've got terminal cancer. He wasn't worried about him because he knew he had very little time to live, but he was concerned about his old wife who couldn't walk. So I called the council and they said, oh, well, you know, it's been rejected because you can walk so many steps or meters. And I said, but how can you reject? So I said to them, come to the house and come and monitor and see how much he's got terminal cancer, and you're making his last months and days a misery because he's so worried about his wife, who he knows that will need the disabled badge. And then they gave him the disabled badge and his wife. And his last few months, I used to remember when he used to phone me, and he was so appreciative. It was something very little that gives a man hope and happiness in his last months of his life. And that's the kind of thing being a councillor entails. You don't have to be a politician. I was never a politician, but community work was my passion and still is, and that's what I find the little things that give me the pleasure to do what I do. There are many reasons why somebody would want to become a councillor, wanting to make a difference and involved in shaping the future of our local community. Being concerned about your local area and wanting to ensure that the community gets the right services, wanting to represent the views of local people to ensure that the community interests are taken into account, wanting to pursue your political beliefs. For me personally, being a councillor is both a rewarding and privileged form of public service. It's an extension of what I already am doing through my charity work. You're in a position where you can make actual tangible difference to the quality of other people's daily life and prospects. Councils are particularly keen to encourage people from underrepresented groups to get involved, such as younger people. People from England, many ethnic communities and disabled people. Women are massively underrepresented on local councils. I mean, I'm also a member of the interfaith, which is Jews, Christians, Muslim, and I host little events where we all get together. So it's about integrating with other faiths. It doesn't mean that you respect each other's views, and we really get on. We have really nice tea and coffee and cakes, and we do like international dishes, and we do a lot. And then lately a project I've taken on board is combat bullying. I don't know if anybody's many children face bullying in school. Some children don't come and tell parents. I mean, I lived in Denmark for many, many years because of my husband's job. After I graduated and got married, I went to Denmark. And when I came to England, my son was 14 years old, and he was being bullied because he'd come at a stage where groups were made and formed, and he was kind of an outstander. He'd come in at an age where children already had their friends, and he was being bullied, and he didn't tell me, and then I felt there's something wrong. And when I asked him what was wrong, he says, "Oh, Mum, you're going to go and tell the teacher, and then they'll bully me more." To this day, I never told him, but I did go to the school, and they did address the issues, and the boys that was calling names and doing stuff to him. But that's many. Some children sadly commit suicide. Many issues are revolved around bullying. So therefore, at least I'm in a position where I can voice my opinion and I can help the children that are suffering. And I think that, like my speakers Saeed and David have said, a lot of what I would have probably said is that it doesn't matter what party you want to be. We'd like you to be conservative, but it's the party that's close to your heart. Something that shares your values, and I think the Conservative Party shares a lot of the Muslim values: marriage, education, better quality of life. And I think that's what I would want for our future, is the kids to have a good education. And I just think, if there's anything anybody wants to say, I would really encourage the women to come forward. Don't let your husbands put you off, like mine did. Because mine was just, even the day when I went to the count, he went to work and he said, I said, "Are you not going to come with me?" He says, "Oh, well, no, because I don't want to see you lose, because you're not going to win." Even on the count, and my 3 sons went with me, and I saw my pile getting bigger. And then when my son texted my husband and said, "Oh, Mum's won," he came in the morning and a big smirk on his face. He says, "You didn't win, did you?" And that's how much faith he had in me already. But my son's had more personally, and I'm so proud of my sons. I'm a biochemist, but every person wants your kids to have a better future. And so proud to sit here and say that my son got Student of the Year award at LSE and was the first Muslim to ever get it in 150 years since LSE was established. And then he went on, he was headhunted when he graduated, and he's now on the road. I mean, he's got a contract with Goldman Sachs, but he keeps studying. And then he went on to do his LPC, again got 100%. Then he went on to do his Masters at LSE, distinction. Then he went on to Cambridge to do his PhD, a Masters in corporate law. Now they said, "We don't want you to go, please do a PhD, you're a perfect candidate." He's now doing a fast-track PhD. There's no limits to what you can achieve, and I think it's just giving the children the surrounding and the environment that you can achieve, like my other speakers have said. Thank you very much.